Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Often I feel like the work that we're doing in Lang 120 feels very disassociated from the work that we're doing in our other classes. So this is just an attempt to get us all to think about the ways in which the writing work that we're doing in your first year writing class will have connections with the work that you're going to be doing in your majors within the disciplines. And so I've invited faculty from across campus to speak with you today about the kinds of writing that they do and that they expect from students in their classes and in their disciplines. I'm not going to introduce them each. I'm going to allow them to introduce each other, to introduce themselves, just so that I don't take any more of their time than I'm already taking. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. Thank you so much for being here.
All right, I guess I'm going to start. My name is Jeremiah Zunguzi, and I'm in the Interdisciplinary Studies Department. I teach classes in Africana Studies. And when Jessica, invited me to be part of this panel, I didn't really know, the structure. So I focused on the content of writing, instead of, the mechanics of it, because I think the mechanics, yes, they're important, but from my, subject, I thought I would introduce you to how, we write in Africana Studies. And see here. So before I start, my title there is, says Thinking from the Margins, Critical Thinking, Researching, and Writing in Africana Studies. I thought, well, it is a provocative title, and what are the margins, for example? What are the margins when we say thinking from the margins? And the margins really are those, spaces that, and people and knowledge that have been excluded from, being written about. And those are the areas that, I'm interested in working on, especially in Africana. So there are different margins. Indigenous peoples, their knowledges, African people of African descent, their knowledges and systems of knowing. And so in Africana Studies, what is Africana Studies? It is a field that, talks about the experience of Africans and people of African descent. And how is writing in Africana? Writing in Africana really, is like writing in any discipline, right? But here I have quick, summaries of what writing means, to me as I delve into Africana studies. So you have there writing as reading, reacting, and or reenacting. So it is important before you even write in my field, you have to read what has been written about. So, and also I have writing as acknowledging facts and unveiling assumptions. This section here is really important in my field because my field has been historically excluded from the table of knowledge. So when I write, I have to engage those assumptions that have been written about the African continent, and also the African diaspora. And also writing as, inquiring, it's questioning. You ask a question and then, look for, the results. And then also writing for me is applying knowledge. You apply it into, various disciplines. Writing for me also is reflecting, is reflecting on those assumptions that have been, said about the African continent. And also writing is communicating. So as you, study Africana issues and write about them, you are, passing down the knowledge that you acquired. So I'm gonna give, this is like one example of my type of writing. And you will see the mechanics they included there. Like I use most of the time MLA, For example, the first, statement, it's known that, explorers, for example, discovered, parts of the world. So as an Afrikaner thinker, I have to investigate, and then sometimes by accident, you come across documents that are not talked about, especially about European expansion. So this is what it said on top, but I find out that, well, really, Europeans, they did not really discover, the world, but there is a sanction, like a papal sanction to invade in Sucha and Capriana. So all those things are part of my writing, finding out, new truth and, that it's not part of the mainstream, let's say, historical narratives. So writing is also critical thinking. For me, writing and critical thinking, they're really important. You cannot, dissociate them, because as you write, you're critically analyzing, any topic that, interests you, in this case, Africana studies. So you have to critical think, and you don't just repeat what has been said, you have to look for new information. Example 2, for example, is, again, the mechanics are at the bottom there. I'm using MLA, and there's a statement, example 2, for example, Kant says, the Negroes of Africa have by nature no feeling that rises above the ridiculous. So as I come across this truth, there is an assumption here. Can you guys tell me what the assumption is? Yes. Right there. Sorry. I'm working with two mediums here. So just read that, purple, part.
That Africans are
Lesser than. So as you come to, this truth, this has been the truth, in the Western, thinking. And Kant is one of the pillars of Western philosophy, and so you have to, unveil the assumptions and then rewrite, almost like rewrite philosophy, rewrite history, rewrite. Every time you come across, some statements, you are faced with, the rewriting process, reevaluating, analyzing, the assumptions. I think I'm going to stop right here to give my, colleagues a chance to speak. And then at the end, as I'm writing, I have, the works, cited. This is important as you are investigating, your topic. At the end, you have to give credit to those who, you read and they, you cited them in your work. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremish. My name's Andrew Lachlan, and I teach in the Environmental Studies Department. Now, this is Lang 120 students. How many of you feel drawn toward environmental studies or feel like you might want to be an environmental studies major at some point? Good. I recognize some of you as students of mine. Well, good. Welcome. So I'm representing part of the natural sciences departments here. And what I did was a little bit different. I took a poll of some of the colleagues I have in environmental studies, and I asked them what sort of writing assignments they assign, what sort of prompts they assign to their students. And I wanted to just give you a brief overview of what these different assignments are, to give you an idea about what to expect, not only in environmental studies, but I imagine these are relevant for biology, for chemistry, for physics, and things like that too. I want to start in sort of do this in a kind of a hierarchical order, from the least amount of structure to the greatest, okay? Because sometimes when you think of science writing, you think high structure, very few adjectives, adverbs, very concise, but that's not always the case. And so I'm trying to pop some balloons for you here. So I want to start with sort of the creative aspects, some of the creative assignments that we have. One of the assignments I have in my ecology class, general ecology and field biology, I ask students to go out and observe insects sometimes, because not everyone has ever done that. For 30 minutes, observe an insect and tell me what it's doing. What is it eating? Is it flying? Is it sitting still? Can it fly? Are there other insects about? Is it interacting with other insects? I want you to sort of be creative. I want you to draw a picture. I want you to do anything you can to draw on from your experience to tell me what that insect is experiencing. So there's definitely some creative writing assignments that we're going to be asking you to do. And kind of moving up from there, I'm not the only one that does that. Other science faculty will ask you to be creative and sort of draw on your own human experience to interpret the natural world. So moving on from there might be some more opportunities to be sort of self-reflective in your writing as a science student. A couple of examples here would be one of our seminar classes. We ask you to give a seminar on a topic of your choosing, and we might ask you to self-reflect on your performance as you were speaking. How do you think you did? What do you think you can improve upon? How did the audience react? Did they react like you were expecting them to react? So these are sort of self-reflection essays that we're going to ask you to write as you move up in your natural science courses. We also are going to want you to reflect on other people's writing or speaking. We might have you write a reflective essay on something that you've read or a seminar that's another person has given who may have been invited to campus. We're sort of moving up in structure. We might give you prompts. As faculty, I think it behooves us to give you prompts. What are we asking you to accomplish? And you'll find that different instructors give you different prompts and have different expectations. And maybe we can come back to that during our Q&A. What exactly are you looking for as a faculty member? You're probably writing research papers in Lang 120. And you're going to be writing research papers as a scientist as well. But what does that mean? It means something totally different in English as it does in physics, or in ecology as it does in chemistry. So there's different types of research papers, and there's different expectations, there's different styles, and there's different structures. Ideally, your instructor is going to tell you what they're looking for when it comes to a research paper. Okay, but it's not always the most structured form of writing that you're going to have in a natural science class. Again, we're sort of moving up in structure from a research paper to a grant proposal. Another assignment that we often assign is, well, if you're seeking funding to study a particular topic, you need to write a proposal that to a specific organization that seeks funding for you to perform that research. And so oftentimes, especially during our seminar classes, we'll ask you to write a grant proposal. And this should ideally come with a set of structures and a set of instructions as to what to follow. You're going to have to be persuasive as well. Asking for money is very hard to do. So this is where your persuasive skills that you're learning now, I think, in Lang 120 are going to come and transfer to the natural sciences classes. I think our most structured form of writing is just the general lab report. So this is a sort of a writing prompt that's going to ask you to do an experiment and then write about it in a very specific way. We're going to ask you to write an introduction. We're going to ask you to write the methods. These are all structured subheadings that you're going to need to follow. After you write the methods, we're going to ask you to write the results. And then we're going to ask you to write a discussion. What's it all mean? How does it all follow? Were your hypotheses supported, or why not? So a lab report is probably the most structured form of writing you're going to have. One other thing I wanted to mention is that different instructors have different ways that they'd like you to cite, or different ways that they'd like you to have footnotes or not. Things like that. How do you cite your literature? When I did my survey, I got 4 or 5 different answers of how they want their students to cite their research. And there's structures according to the Geological Society of America, the Ecological Society of America. They all have different ways of citing material, different ways of structuring their citations. And so ideally, your instructor is going to tell you what to do, and you can follow those prompts. And you're going to find different types of writing styles in the sciences, and you're going to be asked to write in those styles as well. So I think, long story short, is you're learning a lot of different styles in Lang 120, and those are all going to be important when you go up into your natural science classes if you choose to do that.
So I'm John Wood, thank you. I'm in sociology, anthropology, and I was quite a bit daunted by this task of trying to speak to writing in the discipline, and I think you've done a nice job of indicating how many different kinds of writing there can be within a discipline. I started off my professional career as a newspaper reporter, so I learned how to write in the newsroom and spent more than a dozen years doing that, and then became an ethnographer, and then have spent at least that much time writing ethnographies, which is really descriptions and interpretations of other people's culture. And for the last 8 years or so, I've been writing fiction. So in my career, I've written in these different genres and have struggled with the different voices of these different kinds of modalities. And then within anthropology, there are anthropologists that write ethnographies that look a lot like lab reports, that are very highly structured and very specific with lots of nouns and verbs and not a lot of interpretation. And then there are also anthropologists who are writing ethnographies that read more like fables. You know, so there's this wide sweep of different kinds of ways of doing anthropology. So it's hard to kind of say, well, this is kind of what we do in our discipline, because we do all sorts of things in our disciplines. And it makes it very difficult and challenging to create assignments or to tell students how to write, because in some ways what we need to do is convince them that, and convince you to look for models, to look for how other people have done it and find models that sort of work for you. My hunch would be, and I may be crossing some lines here, but I think that my hunch that there's more similarity across the disciplines in writing than there are differences, and that the differences are largely mechanical and easily sort of, you can learn how to do those fairly simply or fairly easily. What's hard is what's shared, and I think what's shared is we share an interest in accuracy. All disciplines have an interest in making sure we're right. We have an interest in coherence. At some level, what we write needs to make sense to somebody else. We have an interest in concision and kind of eliminating fluff. We have an interest in making sure there's a kind of relationship between the ideas we're talking about and evidence, so that there's some things that back those things up. And those are actually the hard parts, but they're the hard parts that kind of translate across. If you can figure out how to be concise, if you can figure out how to be accurate, if you can figure out about making sure there's a relationship, a constant relationship between your ideas or interpretations, your theories, and the evidence you have before you, then I think that you're likely to be able to take whatever you write and make it fit whatever genre you need to write in. I think, for me, and I kind of interpreted my job here as in some ways to kind of offer some tips within anthropology of how you might succeed in an anthropology class around writing. And I've been struck by how important it is. I learned to write, as I said, in a newsroom. I was a high school dropout. I didn't really know how to write. I didn't know how to put a sentence together. And so I started newspaper work sort of feeling behind all the time and having to write and fail a lot. And one of the things that I learned, at least in the way I learned how to write, is to write every day. And I can't emphasize this enough about how even in 15 minutes a day, if you write 15 minutes of whatever it is you have on your plate, whatever assignment you have for a class or just stuff to write, you write 15 minutes a day, you can write a page. And over the course of 20 days, you've got a paper, or over the course of a year, you've got a book. I mean, it really does add up. And it's much easier to write in little increments every day than it is to try and write the night before when it's really pressured. It's a lot easier to edit at the end than it is to generate text at the end. So this is something that I think is a useful kind of habit to get into. It's just writing every day. How am I doing on time? So So, and I think the other thing that I would suggest is, and this comes back to the newspaper stuff, is that there are two personalities in writing. One is creative, that generates the text, and the other is the editor, that kind of puts it into a form that will be acceptable in whatever genre you're writing about. And these two personalities don't like each other, right? They fight in the room when they get together. So it's very important, I think, it seems, in terms of writing, to keep them apart. And so when you're writing and generating text, that you generate text and you send the editor out for coffee, right? And then when you've got some text to work with, then you send the creative one out for coffee and you let the editor have at it. But if these things are separate, you might have more success. How many of you have spent time trying to write and find yourself editing yourself as you go within every sentence, and then you can't get a sentence out, right? And so at some point, it's useful to keep them separate, to write every day, because writing is a little bit like a muscle. If you do it every day, it does get easier. If you don't do it every day, it stays hard. I think the other tip that I would throw out is a narrative structure. In some ways, you can tell stories that are other people's stories or stories about what happened, but you also can tell the story of how you came to understand something. And that narrative, the hardest part, I think, in writing is oftentimes trying to figure out what to write next. And a narrative gives you that structure. So if you're telling the structure, if you're telling the story of how you came to understand something, then that's providing you with a sense of what to say next, because you have a chronology, you have a narrative that you can appeal to. And I guess I've filled up that my time here. So I'm going to say one more thing. Sam Beckett, who's a writer that I admire, a playwright and a novelist, he wrote about writing: ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail again, fail better. So anyway, that's my spiel.
While they're getting set up, just want to invite everyone to be thinking about what questions you have for these presenters. Because after they're finished, you'll have an opportunity to ask whatever questions you're wondering about writing and writing in their disciplines.
All right, I'm Dr. Beers. I'm in the Department of Art and Art History. And writing, we all use the same tools, really. We use words. And what really distinguishes it from one discipline to the other is what we're writing about. And that really determines our assignments, that determines what we're expecting from you. And so for art, what we write about, obviously, is something visual. And I don't know if I have to give a warning for what you're about to see, but it is an artwork. Here we are. It's a nude woman with a gorilla mask. How do we talk about this? How do we talk about a work that has both text, maybe provocative text, that has color, that has forms, shapes? What do we do with it? Well, we look at it. That's what we do in art to begin with. And I think that also applies to a lot of other disciplines where you're writing. There's a step back before you actually start the writing process. There's a lot going on before. And for art, we have 3 different things that we do before. One is a visual analysis that looks at the form. One is an analysis that asks questions. And one is an analysis that looks at the context. So I have these listed here, where for the formal analysis, we look at line, form, space, color, texture, which are all part of the work that we just saw. And we look at what we call the principles of design, how an artist may have put something together as a composition, how rhythm, balance, proportion, and scale affect something. The next one is an interrogative analysis, which is very much in line with my own journalistic training, which is starting to ask questions of what, when, where, how, why, who, and then we have more who and who and who and who and many other questions. And then the last one is an analysis of the context, where we're trying to go to sources outside of the object and the interaction they have with the work of art. So we look at artists' biographies, at collectors, galleries, exhibitions, interviews, museums, and so on. So for today I thought it might be helpful for you to look at one of these assignments that we would do, where we have you do an interrogative analysis, where we ask these questions of what is the object? For whom was it made? What is it made of? What condition is it in? Is it the only one? Also, who made it? Where is it? How did it come here? So we constantly have to go back and forth between these concepts, these ideas, these questions, and the artwork itself. So for this artwork, we actually have an original artwork from which the woman with the gorilla head was taken. It's by a famous French painter, so the question of who made it would be Monsieur Ingres. And it's called the Grand Odalisque, so there's a specific association with it. But we don't necessarily need to know all of these background bits of information to get something out of this artwork and to start a conversation with this artwork, which is what our interrogative analysis starts doing with our writing. So the editor and the creative writer that John was talking about meets another match in that we have a conversation with the object that we're writing about. So we say something and then we look at the object and it says something else to us. So thinking of the writing process as a give and take is very important for art historians. So then we put these two pieces together and we see that the artists who chose to make the yellow poster really switched a few things around. They have a photo of the object rather than a painting. They chose a very starkly contrasting yellow and black background. They changed the format of the object a little bit. They got rid of the curtain in the background. They colored the fabric or blankets, sheets that she's sitting on, all the same pink color. And those pick up again in the numbers and in certain words that are in the text. And then when we know that this was made by a group named the Guerrilla Girls, who are mentioned on this, who are trying to draw attention to inequalities in the art world, and this was a poster that was put on a bus. We're getting a couple more pieces, and it's all of these things coming together, all of these different analyses that really determine the way we write in art history.
Hi, I'm Professor Victoria Bradbury, and I'm in the Department of New Media. Our field and what we teach in our department are fairly wide-ranging, like many of the other faculty have said. We have 3 tracks in New Media: the animation track, the video track, and the interactive track. I teach primarily on the interactive track, so that means a lot of web design, but also interactive sensors, Arduino microcontrollers, and I also teach a virtual reality class. So I wanted to start by showing you, if I go under Chrome, View Developer, View Source, the writing that I did to prepare for this presentation was this HTML document that created my presentation as a website rather than a PowerPoint. So I do a lot of writing in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and so do the students that I teach. That's a lot of the writing that they do in my classes. But in terms of different forms of writing and the way that our field breaks down, people in new media, they may have a fine art-oriented practice, meaning they're creating artworks for museums or for other new media type contexts. And if they have primarily an art practice, then they'll be writing artist statements. So short statements, maybe around 1,000 words, that accompany a body of work or a curatorial project that they're working on. And these are the kind of statements, maybe you'll see them on a wall of a gallery where it talks about what the piece is about. People in new media might have a more commercial practice. So they might be web designers. They might be working in the field of VR, creating virtual reality games. They might be working as animators. And if you're working in that way, it's a more practical kind of field. So you might not be doing as much prose type of writing, But if you're someone who's possibly going to create a startup or create your own company or work as a manager within that field, then any kind of writing that you might do as a manager, grant writing, proposal writing, other business and management type of writing would be essential within the commercial field of new media. And I'm going to focus largely on the academic field of new media. And there's different forms of writing that happen within academia as well. I'm going to talk about those forms. And oftentimes, people who work in new media as academics, they have a fine arts practice or an artistic practice of some sort, and they write as well. So we do both, and that is the case for me. So I'm going to talk to you about some different types of academic writing. There's technical or pedagogical guides that people publish in new media. Things like this book, Digital Foundations, Intro to Media Design, by Extine Burrow and Michael Mandelberg. So this is a book that tells professors different assignments that they can teach in a new media foundations class. This is a book by Professor Kurt Cloninger, who's in our department, called Fresh Styles for Web Designers. So again, it's a practical guide to creating websites and designing websites that he published. A book called, these are edited or authored volumes that bridge practical and theoretical texts. So oftentimes in our field, we create volumes where authors write about the artwork that they do and how they do it from a really practical perspective, but then bring in theory as well, like art history and other theoretical commentary. So we have Networks by Extine Burrow, projects that people made for the web and what their thinking was around them. And then Rethinking Curating, Art After New Media. This was by my PhD supervisors, Beryl Graham and Sarah Cook. And it's a text where they talk about the practice of curating new media artworks. What kind of special considerations come into play when you're curating stuff that has to do with technology? And what kind of hurdles are there that could come into play in the gallery with highly technical works? Theoretical texts, they might be online. So Professor Cloninger writes a lot of his theory and just publishes it directly on the web. This is a piece called Glitch Linguistics that he wrote. Traditional published volumes that are more theory-based. So Mark B. Hansen is a philosopher, and he writes philosophies of new media. In thinking about my own practice, when I was deciding where to go to college, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go to art school or if I wanted to pursue a writing practice, because I really enjoyed both. I ended up choosing art school and didn't do as much writing there as I had hoped, although I was able to do some creative writing in my English classes. So after focusing on my art practice in my bachelor's degree, after that time I was making artworks, and I was mostly focused in that artist statement category, so I was writing short artist statements. I later went on to do an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts in New Media, and continued to write kind of artist statements. And then as I started teaching, I started publishing papers in new media, and that was what led me to be interested in pursuing a PhD. And these are the types of writing that I do now. So this is a VR project that I'm working on with voxels that is in development currently in the Unreal Game Engine, and I created these 3D models, and I'm creating a narrative around this story that I'm building for a VR artwork. But when I go to propose this to exhibitions, I'll have to write exhibition proposals around this work. What's it about? What kind of technology was used? This is an example of a paper that I published about ventriloquism and code in a journal. Online discussions are important in our field. This is a screenshot of my email inbox. So we'll often have discussions on email with other practitioners in our field. And those are really important in actual professional writing practice within our discipline. This was a discussion that I led in 2014 in the month of March. And people from all over the world contributed. And there's some really extensive text in there that you can cite in papers and other publications. I just had an article published in Ural Magazine, which was a review of a conference that I went to. It just came out 2 days ago. I thought I'd include that. It's a new media magazine. And then I'm currently working on a book project, which is one of those theoretical and practical texts called Art Hack Practice. And technology really comes into play in our writing process. So this is me up here, and then my collaborator, Susie O'Hara, on the right. And we're talking with one of our authors, Mugendi Mutrida. He's in Cape Town, South Africa. We have contributors from 5 continents in our book, and we Skype them. Every Friday we do Skype sessions. Susie's in the UK, I'm here in Asheville, and we Skype someone from some other country who's going to be in our book. So the technology that we use is really important to the writing that ends up coming out of the work. And just some other images from that. And just a little plug, Susie, my collaborator, is coming here from the UK to jury the New Media Spring Exhibition, and she's doing this talk in Zeiss 202 on Friday, April 6th at 3:30 in conjunction with our Spring Juried New Media Exhibition. So I'd love to see you all there, and you can hear more about our book project and our collaborative practice there. Thank you.
All right, is this, oh, it is, it's on, wonderful. Thank you so much to our presenters. It was fascinating. I loved hearing about all the varying kinds of writing that you do as academics and across campus. So I would like now to invite anyone who has a question. I'll walk the mic around and you can ask our panelists whatever you're interested in about writing and their perceptions of writing.
Are there any classes you guys teach outside of your fields? Like, I'm majoring in political science. Do any of you teach any classes in that or anything? Or is it mainly just your field and then just like small, like other areas? Any of y'all?
I teach in humanities. I also used to teach in arts and ideas, but most of my art history classes really qualify as arts classes. So that's something you can take as any student. Any class that are arts designated are really open to other students. But yes, so you'll have faculty teach in the humanities from different disciplines, and they bring their lens to that field. I very much teach my humanities course with an art history lens.
I teach in modern language and literatures, so besides Africana, I'm interested in literature, in interpreting literature and language. I teach language to Portuguese.
I think the other thing is, what occurs to me is that we have electives and we invite people from different disciplines into our classrooms. So I think anthropology tends to be pretty ecumenical. So I encourage political science students and economists and art historians and other people to come into anthropology to cross-fertilize that way.
Yeah, I'd answer the same way. I don't teach in other classes in other areas in the university, but in our department we have a lot of crossover with computer science, art, and mass communications are the main ones where students take classes in our discipline.
Thank you.
I think that's one of the beauties of the liberal arts curriculum is that you have those opportunities, right? Anyone else? Any other questions?
Hello, so my name's Albert, and my question is, so imagine a situation where you would have, you'd be writing a certain kind of topic, or you'd be writing about a topic in a certain style or structure that isn't something that you're quite familiar with. How would you best approach that?
I think I would first of all read as much as I can in the style that I'm trying to emulate. Reading is going to be the way that you learn how to write, right? So that's my short answer.
Yeah, and I'd say without plagiarizing, to a certain extent, there's some level of copying of structure that occurs, right? So you can read and then look closely at how has this person structured this? What kind of writing were they starting with, and where were they trying to get to, and what happens in between? And I find structure, once I started to think more about structure, it helped me become such a much more efficient writer, because once I could lay out a structure, it suddenly just becomes filling in the in-between parts, right? So if you can figure out where you're going to begin and where you're trying to get to in the end. It just helps you to be able to fill in what the content is.
So it would be a matter of like reading up on those styles and structures and trying to discover the motivations behind those in order to create more efficient writing, right?
So.
I'd want to add a complexity to it in the sense that, on the one hand, you've got a topic, and you've got a kind of genre or a style that you're appealing to. It seems also that a decision about writing ought to reflect the topic itself, that in some ways, at least in anthropology, there's this challenge of how do you make the writing itself reflect appropriately what it is you're writing about, right? So that there's and that's partly why I think anthropology has so many different kinds of styles, because we're writing about so many different kinds of people, and they're very different. And so it's useful to have, if you have a very bureaucratic kind of style of writing, that might be inappropriate in talking about, this very tightly organized, may not be the most appropriate style to reflect a culture that's not very bureaucratic and is more improvisational, say. And so it seems to me that what ought to be driving the structure is not only the genre, which is real, but also the subject matter, and that the subject matter is driving some of these decisions itself, right?
I also want to throw in one more thing, and that is time. It depends on how much time you have. If you have, a night to do it, then I'm not really sure I can give you any advice. But if you're thinking about, you have a week or 2 weeks, then reading would certainly be helpful. If you have more time, if you have a semester, you should take a class in that direction that you're trying to go in, because that would give you the broadest exposure to really that kind of work that you're aiming to do. So it depends a little bit on what your goal is and where you're starting from. But yeah, if you're pressed for time, the answer is going to be look at a style guide. Each discipline has style guides with specific rules, and just try to get by with that for the moment, for the time being.
And be consistent. Don't mix styles. You pick one and just use that one for the entire paper or book.
Okay, then thank you for your responses.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Okay, so I was just wondering, when you guys were our age in college, what is one of the hardest things or the harder things that y'all have had to overcome when it comes to writing, and how did you overcome it?
What is a complete sentence? I mean, actually, that wasn't so hard because you could figure that out pretty quickly. For me, I think, as I said in what I was saying earlier, I still find it's often hard in writing to know what to say next. And this kind of notion, I put something down, and in some ways, all writing is responding to what you've already got. And then it's like, okay, do I go this way or do I go that way? These judgments that are involved. And so the more structure it is, it helps that, if you've got a tight structure, then you sort of can fill in the blanks and you have a sense of what goes next. If you don't have a tight structure, anything could go next. And so it's hard to figure out what's next. So in some ways, maybe learning to find a structure, whatever that is useful, because you can waste an awful lot of time trying to figure out what are you going to say next.
When I was your age, I knew nothing about structure, and that's why I think it was an important lesson for me, but not necessarily an important one for me to have at that time, because as I said, I was studying art, and most of my writing at that time was in sketchbooks and journals, and I would just fill up sketchbooks, writing in my little Pilot pen, in sketchbook after sketchbook, just whatever I was thinking about in my creative process or in my life. And and I think back to the fact that was a very analog process. I didn't have a smartphone, so I wasn't distracted by that. So I was really focused on whatever thought came up, I would write it down in a journal. And sometimes I feel concerned that maybe students today don't do that as much, because it really was a more freeing way to allow me to think about writing that was less structured than what I would come to much later?
I guess for me, the most difficult thing when I was an undergrad was answering the prompts that professors gave me. So they come up with, 3, 4 prompts, answer this question, write a paper. Like most of the times, I was not interested in the things that they told me to write about. So I think that was the biggest challenge. And, again, I was interested, in this field that, there's little, like written about. So I sometimes went to my, to the office, to the, like office hours and tell the professor, I cannot work on these topics. Can I write about something else that has to do with me? So, so that, that was, pretty much, the way out answering prompts. That was really difficult, and it's still difficult today.
I think my biggest difference or challenge would have been that at your age, I was writing in German exclusively. And so German is very different. And when you write in another language, you have to acknowledge that each language has different modes and preferences, that in order to be proficient in that language, it's not enough to know the grammar and the vocabulary, but there's a specific writing style. So when I started writing papers here in grad school, I would have sentences that would go pretty much the whole page, because in German you can do that, and multiple pages, no problem, for one sentence. And so that was an adjustment for me. I think the other one was that I was always writing in 2 styles because I was an academic, but I was also a journalist. So I'd be a roving reporter and have blurbs in one style, and then I'd have to shift modes. And so I think ultimately it's a good practice to be able to write in different ways, have different audiences in mind as you're writing. And this is something you can start, right now. It will help you when you're writing for different classes, that you can shift your writing style from, say, humanities style to physics style to English style writing, and really sort of find a comfort zone with that. But yeah, if you're going out into a study abroad situation and you have to write in a different language, just be aware that their writing style might differ quite a bit from what you're used to.
I think for me, it would be the lesson was rewriting is rethinking, and that took me it took a long time for that to get into my head. And but it's one of the best lessons I think I learned as an undergraduate. But it also goes along with what Dr. Bears was saying earlier about how much time you have. Oftentimes you don't have enough time to rewrite something. But I think that if you're stuck in a situation where you can't think of what to write next, it also helps, instead of looking forward, to look backward, rewrite what you've already written, and that might help propel you into a new direction that you didn't think of earlier. So rewriting is rethinking. I can still see the sign on my writing teacher's wall that she posted up, and it's stuck with me ever since. So.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is David, and I heard I think Dr. Ward, you said there are more similarities in writing in different fields than there are differences. So my question is, can we just come to a conception that we should have freedom in writing? Because in my lab class, my professor actually gave us freedom to write papers in with the format that has to do with the probably majors, I think. For example, let's say I'm an art student and I'm taking this lab. I can write with the art style in this class. So don't you think, considering the fact that we're in a liberal arts school, we should have a freedom in writing?
So I guess you were I'll address that, even though I think that my colleagues will have as much to say and more. I didn't mean to say that somehow all writing is the same, as much as to say that what makes writing hard is hard across these different genres. I do think, in a liberal arts context, that in the same way that it's useful to learn a new language, it's useful for you as an art student in a chemistry class to learn how chemistry represents its world. I think that's an important process to go into. If we all wrote the same way, we'd never really learn, we'd never really stretch ourselves to know that there are different voices that we can use to talk about the world. So that, I think, I would want to, I'm in favor of freedom, but I also am in favor of learning different ways of voicing particular things about the world. I don't know if that addresses your question, but it's my response.
I'm totally fine with everybody writing in whichever style they choose, as long as it's Chicago style. So I think we're all good then. But no, more seriously, I did go through a couple of different disciplines as a student, and so I learned MLA as a literature student and AP for my journalism, and in communication studies we did APA, and then in art history we had both Turabian and Chicago style. And the reason why you want to be comfortable with all those styles is not here. Here, we can be flexible. This is a wonderful little community where we have an incredible amount of freedom to do whatever we like, because we can communicate with each other. However, as you're going out, there are rigid structures still in place. Our world is not a liberal arts university world. It is very much a categorized, separated world. And so in order to succeed in that world, I think it is important that you're at least aware of a couple of different styles. And if you've practiced and used them already here, it'll be much easier for you to succeed and submit a journal article for the Geological Society, as well as for an art history journal. So that's why I think it's a good idea to accept whichever style the professor is asking you to use and just learn that, because it'll help you in the long run.
And the styles, they're kind of institutions, so like the institutions, like usually they have requirements. And I think the best way to find that freedom is you to come up with your own style. So, but even if you come up with your own style, guess what? You will set up rules for other people coming after you. So, look at the styles as, some, bureaucratic institutions you have to, deal with, and, while thinking about your own style in the future.
Thank you all so much, and Ruth, please join me in thanking our panelists today. That was wonderful.